Welcome to Unleash Your Inner Goldilocks, how to get it just right. It is an exciting opportunity to delve into another time-sensitive and life-affirming conversation. Aging is something that we cannot avoid. Everybody who is born goes through the process of aging, and end of life is as guaranteed as the start of life. In the United States, we talk about how death and taxes are the two things that are a certainty, and we plan for everything. We plan for everything from birth all the way to education, to career, to where we're going to raise a family. But for some reason, we stop ourselves from planning for our older years, the years we kick back after retirement. How are we going to spend our time? How are we going to make that part of our life as fun and enjoyable and as dignified as possible? And today's conversation, we're going to talk about aging with dignity and grace, and why leave it to chance. Anything we don't plan, we are leaving uncertainties and circumstances to take over, and we're gambling with it. We're leaving it to chance. Why leave our old age to chance when we've earned the right and we've invested in ourselves and everybody around us? What if we thought about the fact that we owe it to ourselves to invest in our latter years, invest in the joy and dignity and grace of our latter years, and do the planning as a family so that everybody has peace of mind, and live every moment to its fullest? Because the one thing we know about life is if we don't live in the moment and we are not present, we are not going to be able to actually live. If we are dreaming about all the things that we want to do in the future, or we are thinking about all the things we've accomplished, either way, we're not living in the moment and life happens at present. If we figured that out for our children and our careers, then what if we took the time to plan for ourselves as well? To have this very important conversation with me is somebody I just recently met, but I have had some great conversation with. David Koch, good to have you on the program. Welcome.
Thank you, Kaz. It's a real honor to be here.
Thank you. David helps families plan for the senior years. And senior years don't mean that you're invalid, you can't function on your own. It is about, as we get older, how do we transform our life in a way that we can truly live it to the fullest? Children are grown up, children are moved to another place in some cultures, children are with you. So depending on where you are and your circumstances, the need for planning will change. But David, why don't you talk to us about, first of all, how you got into this field, because it's not a field you naturally grew up in. That itself is interesting. And then what attracted you to this?
Sure, of course, glad to. My background is technically corporate IT, and I did that for 30 years. And you reach a point, a milestone like 30 years, where you think, this was fun, but maybe I should try something else. And I didn't know what that something else was. So to make it happen, I stepped away from my career and I started looking. And along the way, I discovered assisted living locators. And I liked what they did. I liked the fact that you would be helping families, not just the seniors, but the whole family, go through that senior living situation. And I was attracted to it partly because 10 years ago, when my father had vascular dementia, we didn't really know what to do. We didn't know that there were companies like this that would help you. And we did the best we could, with some in-home aids and a lot of time from my sisters and me. We were able to keep Dad at home, which is what he wanted. I'm not sure in the end it was really the best thing for him. I'm a big advocate for the social aspects of senior living as opposed to, aging in your home or in your apartment. But I liked the concept of doing this type of work. And since I've been in it, one thing I've learned, and you touched on it, is that most people avoid this subject, much like death. They just don't want to talk about senior living and what their wishes are when they get older. A comment I've made a lot over the last few months is we as a nation, maybe a Western society, have kind of figured out the first 20 years of life, right? You're born, you get a few years, and then we send you off to school, and we've pretty much mapped it out for you till you're about 20 or 22. And then you're on your own. We don't really have a plan for that last 20 years. It's sort of still up for grabs. And I think a lot of people without a structure to help them get through it flounder, and they don't know what should I be doing now, or what should I get ready for, what should I expect. And I'm on a mission to help educate people about what they can expect and how to prepare for it and make the most of it, because as you said, you should enjoy it. It should be almost the reward for a life lived well. And unfortunately, too many people are surprised by it and they're caught off guard, and therefore it's not a pleasant situation.
Mhm. And so as you work in this field and you're helping families,
Mhm.
what are some of the scenarios you're running into? And how often is the whole family involved? Because the families tend to get involved when the senior is not fully functional. But then a person who's retired can start planning for this when they are still fully functional, because
Absolutely.
you don't have to wait till you're invalid to plan all the fun you want to have in your retirement.
Right. It's like any other aspect of life. You need to plan for it, right? We plan for our children's college education. We plan for our career. We plan for our families. So you need to get ahead of this. And the sooner you at least start thinking about it, the better. You need to plan it financially. How are you going to afford these years? And there's, of course, a lot of great financial planners that can help you do that. But there's also the legal aspects. You should have those important documents in place long before you need them. The powers of attorney, the medical power of attorney, the living will, the DNR, just to have it all there and review it periodically. Because if you're on top of it and you write them up in your 30s, a lot changes between the age of 30 and 70. And also talk to your family. I think a lot of times the children, as they grow up, they don't really know what mom and dad's wishes are. What kind of life do they want when they're in their 60s, 70s, and 80s? Because sometimes, as with my dad, dementia is a very real problem, and sometimes it deprives you of effectively describing what you want. So having those conversations early, taking the stigma out of the whole thing and just making it another part of life, no different than getting excited for the birth of a grandchild or a niece or a nephew. Plan ahead, get ahead of this thing. A lot of people are surprised by just how expensive it can be, depending on which route you go. Your comment about how is the family involved? Most of the time, the burden falls to the eldest daughter if there are several children. It's just, think of it as the passing of the torch from mom to the eldest daughter, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes the family can be very helpful and work together to do the best thing for mom and dad if plans were not clearly laid out. Unfortunately, sometimes families do what families do, and it devolves into another reason to argue and get mad at each other. But again, talking about it early, getting things maybe in writing so that there's no confusion when times change and you need to address these things, that really helps. For example, I was working with a family, the father had passed away, mom was now approaching certain decisions, and because dad had taken care of everything, she didn't know where any of the papers were. She didn't even know if they existed. So again, kudos for dad for getting things in place, but unfortunately he forgot to tell his wife where everything was stored, and as a result, she was without any of those documents.
You bring up an excellent point. I remember I got this terrible flu one time. This was about 8 years ago. I was in Chicago. And middle of the night, I woke up my husband, opened up the safe we have in the house, and went through the whole file with documents and notes of where everything is with my husband, right? So I woke a man up middle of the night, and I'm going through all of this, and he's like, "What are you doing?" But I feel so sick, I don't think I'm going to make it to the morning. So I want you to have all of these things. And so that was a wake-up call for us. We were young, right? We
Mhm.
were young. We were in our, I guess, 40s. But it's a good reminder at all times. Normally, one person in the family takes care of all of this. How do we keep the other informed? How do we make sure that other people who are on the will know what their roles and responsibilities are? Just like in an organization, bring everybody in so that the vision, mission, and the values are shared. And the journey is a shared journey. If one person is unable to fulfill, the other person steps up and does this, right? Like in
Yeah.
this program, if ever I have a power outage, my buddy and my other half, Robin, will step in and run the program. That's what smart people do. Why do we suddenly become unsmart when it comes to our planning in our retirement? Maybe we just don't want to believe that we're getting old. And it's harder, the way you mentioned, when we get dementia, if we get dementia, it makes it harder because at some point we also forget to recognize ourselves in the mirror, right? I've been reading about this only because I don't have kids. My husband and I, we don't have kids. So we expect to age with no immediate family.
Mhm.
And whoever is last to go will have to have everything in place because it's not going to be immediate family that's going to take care of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually just working with a daughter, an only child, taking care of both of her parents in different situations. And in the course of working with her, she admitted that the reason she had two children is she didn't want to put that burden on any one of her child, like it all fell to her, because she knows that she's it. She is the person caring for, both of her parents, and she has no one to turn to. In my dad's situation, I had two sisters to turn to. So yeah, you've got it interesting as well, where you're probably going to have to rely on some friends and maybe build some relationships ahead of time. Yes, that's what I would recommend. Get to know certain people well in advance.
So as we are thinking along the lines of planning,
Yes.
not everybody needs to plan for that end of life when they're 60, 65, right? So we get out of the workforce at 62 or 67, we can start collecting Social Security, Medicare at 65. So normally people tend to retire at 65 because you can get your Medicare, your Social Security kicks in, life is okay. But in order to make it okay at that point, they need to have started planning in their 50s to figure out where they're going to live, what quality of life they need. And it's not necessarily a senior living planning, but a retirement planning, which involves all your legal stuff, your attorney, your investment portfolio. There are multiple people involved in this planning process. What advice do you have for people to start planning earlier on? Because then you have your runway room and you put everything in place for when you get there.
Sure. One of the first steps, of course, is discussing it. Just broach the subject. Talk about it with your spouse. Talk about it with your children. We just went through a lot of holidays. That would have been a great time to have this conversation around a dining room table one day. But the next time you get together with your family, just talk about it, and talk about all aspects of it. Even, your preference. Do you want to be buried? Do you want to be cremated? What do you want at the very end? Where do you want to live? Do you want to stay where you've lived for maybe the past 50 years raising a family, or do you want to move somewhere? What do you want to do during that time? I think a lot of times, as you mentioned, people retire at 65 and they have no idea what they're going to do with the rest of their life. And unfortunately, sometimes those people just become very, very bored and they get unhappy. And this isn't the golden years. This is really not fun. So think about it. What are you going to do? Are you going to pick up a hobby? Are you going to become involved with charities? Are you going to go teach, travel? And if so, how are you going to pay for these things? So, of course, like I said, start talking about it. And then I think you need to start talking with a financial planner to figure out, how are we going to pay for this? You know, fingers crossed, we all will live longer than generations before us. How are we going to pay for those extra decades that maybe our grandparents didn't see? And also, once you start doing that financial planning, you should start to get your head around, what is this all going to cost? Start to educate yourself about what the options are out there. And people like my colleague Jennifer and I can help you with that. We can get you in touch with communities so you can at least start to look and see what the offerings are. As I said, my dad stayed at home the rest of his life, and that was partly because he didn't know what options were out there. And some of them are quite attractive and some are affordable. So educate yourself. The worst case scenario, of course, is mom's living alone. Maybe she's living with her spouse. Maybe the spouse is taking care of mom. The spouse passes away and now the caregiver's gone, or mom has an accident, is in the hospital, but she can't go home. And now the family has to figure out very quickly, where is she going to go? You don't want to find yourself in that situation. You want to have sort of a plan in place so that when the unexpected happens, you've at least got a blueprint. May not be perfect, but it's better than nothing.
Yes, I'm from the financial world, and rule number one, our failure to plan is our plan to fail. I mean, that's a given.
Yeah.
And so why plan to fail? Why not have a plan? Now, one of the surprising facts that I was confronted with when I was the CFO for the Chicago Teachers Pension Fund is there were so many retired teachers who were homeless. All their possessions were in a black trash bag, and we held their pension checks, and they came to the office and picked it up because the cost of living in Chicago is too high, and not all folks who are retirees can afford to live in Chicago. And I know in the newspapers, they talk about all the principals and all the administrators. They don't talk about the homeless teachers. So what about the people who are not poor enough to be destitute and qualify for all of the funded programs, and who don't have enough to get a home? It's always that folks in the middle that suffer, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a very unfortunate situation. If you have the resources, you have many options. If you have almost no resources and you're on Medicaid, there are some things in place to help those people. But a large population falls in that gray area in the middle. They're not that well off, but they're not destitute. What options can they expect? And to be quite blunt, the options are few and far between. I think it's an industry, a gap in the industry that needs to be filled by someone. I don't know who that person is and what they're going to do, but it's an unaddressed segment of the population that's going to need an option. Because right now, I hate to say it, the options are not that good. Which again, if that's the reality, at least get ahead of it and figure out, fine, if that's the situation, how am I going to handle it? What am I going to do instead? And as you pointed out, maybe it's move away from Chicago, find a place where the cost of living is lower, and know what those are so you can get ahead of it before you're maybe unable to move on your own or move safely. It's an excellent point, Kaz, and it's one that I wish I had a better answer for. Someone needs to fill that gap.
So there is a market opportunity
Sure.
for someone to move in and provide that service. And one of the things that is happening in an increasing trend is folks are choosing to move south of the border. I find it so ironic that we talk about border issues and we don't want anybody coming through our borders, our southern borders, but our seniors are moving through the southern borders into those same southern countries to have a better quality of life where their money goes further. And now in all of the Central and South American countries, the most politically stable ones, There are senior living communities popping up, eco-friendly communities popping up where you live off the grid. You don't have electricity bills. You don't have water bills. The nature takes care of it. So sustainability and affordable senior living and these communities growing their own plants and vegetables and fruits. This is becoming very popular. We personally, my husband and I, 4 years ago, we invested in a property in the country of Belize because it's an English-speaking country, legal work, financial work, everything can be done in English. A 45-minute flight into Dallas or an hour and 15-minute flight into Miami. We're in the United States, and it's a currency fixed to the US dollar. So the flexibility is there, the currency translates. And so we planned ahead. And I'm seeing more and more of my firefighter, police officer students, I've taught this population for 23 years. They're moving into Honduras, Costa Rica, Belize, Panama. And so we are having senior migration into these countries. So 2 questions. If we shut down the border, seniors don't have choices, one.
Let's not do that.
That's a double-edged sword. But when people start moving this way, how does that affect some of the work you guys do? Or is there anything you can help with them there?
Well, all I can help in regards to things outside of the continental US is maybe help educate. You mentioned a lot of ideas south of the border. I mean, if you head across the Atlantic, Portugal is a very affordable place to retire. So I could help a family understand some of their options. You know, I mentioned to you the other day that just last year I went to Costa Rica, sort of looking at it as a potential retirement spot for myself. A good friend of mine and his wife are looking at Panama, as you mentioned. Again, it's that planning ahead. Is it a realistic option? So, you know, just the fact that you've brought this up is something I can do with a family if, you know, they're being very good stewards of the family and getting ahead of the game by thinking, well, what would we do in 10, 20 years? A lot of people would never consider that until it's presented in front of them. And then they think, maybe that is an option. Because as you said, especially for the south of the border options, the travel time is not much. And you can be right back into Miami in just a couple hours from many of those destinations you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. So we have access to the US healthcare system if we want to. We can come out. And so to me, that's what feels attractive. But then the other question that comes to my mind is United States have so many immigrants. And not all of us have first or second language is English. So one of my real questions I ask myself is, say, I live to be 75, 80. Let's assume. And by 65, 70, I start getting Alzheimer's or dementia. One of the things that I'm going to forget is the newer languages I've learned. So I'm going to revert to my language, Tamil. And I don't believe anybody in the United States would be able to communicate with me because I don't have a large enough Sri Lankan Tamil population in the United States. And even if I have made arrangements for somebody to care for me and I have a living arrangement, living facility all arranged and leave Belize, come back to the US, I have the money, everything is taken care of. But who's going to communicate with me? How am I going to get the services I need? How do I function in a society where my language is not understood and I have lost the capacity to understand why everybody else is not understanding me?
Yeah, it's we talked about this the other day. This is a very interesting situation because most of the assisted living, memory care, independent living offerings currently are geared toward Caucasians, African Americans, Christians, Jewish faith. You don't see a lot of Asian, African, Hindu, Muslim residents. I learned about a company in the greater New York area that will go into some of these properties and help them begin the transition to accommodate people of other cultures. It's not surprising that it's happening in New York. You know, there's some of this happening on the West Coast as well. Here in Cleveland, Ohio, we are, of course, behind the ball a little bit, but a colleague of mine in New York pointed out that there is a company that's starting to address this shortcoming, much like that middle section we were talking about where the offerings are pretty lean. I think there's a lot happening in this industry to start filling those gaps. And like you said, should your second or third language become forgotten, how are you going to communicate with the people around you? So I think it's likely to see in the next 10 years a lot more multicultural and multi-ethnic influence within these properties. They've been targeting a particular demographic for decades, and I think they now have to realize that that's not the resident they can be expecting all the time in the coming years.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because not everybody who looks like you, David, is a native speaker, right? They could be Lithuanian, they could be Italian, they could be Portuguese.
Mm-hmm.
And so English is not going to be the language.
Yeah. And you know, whether there's a company that will help properties get ready for what's coming, there's still the underlying question of who are they going to employ? Where are you going to find these people to do these translations or to do these assistance with people that are of maybe the same background as the resident? Huge untapped market. I'm very curious to see where these people come from, because even if you don't talk about this specific part of support, the staffing, even at the current properties with the current employees, is a huge issue. You know, COVID did a real number on the assisted living, memory care, independent living world. It took a lot of people out of the game, and many properties are struggling to stay staffed.
So that's interesting you pose it that way. My very first job in the United States was with AT&T broadband,
Mm-hmm.
and in the Chicago region. And one of the real issues we had to face is, while Chicago is a very diverse city, every ethnic group lives in its own enclave. Mm-hmm. If we are going to provide service in the Chinatown area, we needed people who spoke Mandarin. If we went into the Vietnamese area in Argyle, we needed somebody who spoke Vietnamese. We needed Korean, Lithuanian, you name it, right? If you go into the Indian village or Indian town, you have to be able to speak Hindi or Urdu. So we at AT&T actively recruited from the marketplace people who spoke the language and trained them. We didn't approach that as a diversity issue. We approached that as a voice of a customer issue. If that's the voice of our customer, how do we serve that customer? And if we do the business right, then the inclusion happens and the diversity is the outcome.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that needs to happen in this industry as well. I think they need to begin hiring help, aides, staff of the ethnicity that the residents will be coming in as. That's an awkwardly phrased sentence. They need to prepare for the people coming to them from these different backgrounds with people employed by the assisted living community who are of that nationality or that religion. All the more reason you need to keep the borders open and bring in people to assist with people who are already here.
I see a great opportunity for educational institutions and senior living services to partner and go into the ethnic enclaves and recruit future workers and train them and skill them. People are looking for work.
Yeah. And
this is not on the checklist of professions. How do we attract them? How do we bring them in to the industry? And how do we give them a career path within the industry? Because some of these communities will never enter this field if it's not a career maker. right? I mean, let's face it, my South Asian community, they don't care if you want to be a chimney sweep. Just go get a PhD and design a machine and automate it, right? Then you're
Yeah.
Dr. Chimney Sweep, right? That is a requirement. So when we go into some of these communities, understanding the culture, and not just to attract them, but where is the career path? So there's an entire employee life cycle and the customer voice, understanding all of these needs to take place, especially in an age where we're talking about inclusion, we're talking about diversity, but we don't seem to be doing much in the healthcare, aging and dying. That last 20, 25 years and the healthcare sector is not doing that, unlike the other fields.
Yeah. You know, I mentioned earlier my background was corporate IT, and part of the reason I got into IT back in the 90s was that it had a bit of that Wild West flair. You know, things had not settled. It was still anybody's game, and there were all kinds of things yet to happen, like the internet, like smartphones. So there was a lot of positioning and trying things out, and that was fun. I genuinely enjoyed that time in that industry. I get the feeling there's the same type of Wild West aspect to senior living right now. Obviously, with the baby boomers coming, that people are getting ready for that, call it silver tsunami. I think you're going to find some very creative and entrepreneurial type people show up to start addressing many of these needs that we're touching on, you know, the cultures and the ethnicity and the costs. I think you're going to see a lot of disruption in this industry over the next decade. And that's good. I mean, if nothing else, I think it's good for someone my age, because by the time I get there, a lot of these things will be sorted out and it'll all be perfect and seamless, and I will have a wonderful experience. But go ahead.
You and me both.
But I'm being sincere when I say I think there are some pretty important things about to happen in this industry to address what has, you know, from decades been overlooked. Because if you really take this industry for what it is, it's not that old. I mean, the first true assisted living property really opened in 1982 in Portland, Oregon. So you're talking about an industry that's only 40 years old. Now, yes, there were other types of properties before 1980s, but you take a look at all that's happened in those 40 years, and it's a lot, you know, because before them, you pretty much had nursing homes, and that was it. So I think this industry is going to continue to change and address those needs of their residents, the people coming to these properties. And there's going to be a lot of them.
Well, so here is what I'm going to ask you, David, and your colleague, Jennifer.
Yes.
Keep us posted. And when there are recognizable changes, come back. Let's talk. Let's keep educating folks. And I invite you to come back and keep us appraised, because the more we talk and the more awareness we create, the more actionable lifestyle we can actually help people adapt.
More than happy to do that. And I can guarantee you, if we were to talk again in 5 years, I would have quite a few updates for you at that time. I know this industry is changing. Beautiful,
beautiful. So before I open this up for conversation with our live audience, I want you to share two things. What is the best way for folks to reach out to you, to talk to you, get your guidance? And what 3 tips you have for them as a takeaway to start planning?
Sure. Obviously, we have landing pages on the internet with our contact information, phone numbers. If you look for assisted living locators, you can find Jennifer and me and our colleagues all there. Best way to reach me is give me a call. The phone number's out there. If it's okay, 330-348-0957. The 3 tips I would suggest, number 1 is, as I said, start talking about it, and talk about it when it's still just a conversation. I'm being totally upfront here. My son is a sophomore in college, and a couple months ago, we were having lunch somewhere at a sports bar while a Cleveland Browns football game was on, and I just forced the issue, and we started talking about how would you like to be buried or cremated, or where would you like to be buried? And we just had that conversation. It was kind of weird at first, but after about the first 2 minutes, it was just something to talk about. No different than where would you like to go work when you graduate, right? So just talk about it. Begin the conversation early. Number two, educate yourself about what's out there, whether that's through someone like myself. And again, I'm a free service. I'm just a resource to families. It doesn't have to only happen when you're at a point where you're about to move. Maybe you just want to start discussing things, maybe even a decade ahead of time. I'd be happy to talk with a family, whether it's with me or just on your own. Become a little familiar with what's out there. At least here in Ohio, anytime you drive around and you see construction going on, chances are it's another senior living property going up. It's happening. Talk to somebody about it, or go for a tour. Just see what they have to offer. And then the last thing, plan ahead financially. You cannot start that too soon. Your background would jive very well with this comment. Don't wait. Start figuring out, how are you going to pay for this, and how are you going to pay for those extra decades that maybe your grandparents didn't have the luxury of planning for. We will probably live into our 90s, maybe even past 100. So how are you going to afford all that, right? It's a great problem to have, but you still need to fund it. So begin thinking the dollars and cents, because if you have that in place, so many of the other things are less stressful.
I'm just imagining me living to be 100. God help the world.
Well, once they figure out how to reverse the aging process, turning 100 won't be a big deal at all. You'll be 40 again.
No, I don't need to live that long. Once the job is done, I'm ready to check out. So see, one of the notions people have is that a nursing home is too expensive, a cruise is cheaper. So this is something that I tell myself. I'll figure out a way to do some training and some educational programs on a cruise ship. It costs less than $100 a day. My bed is made, my towels are clean, my bathroom is cleaned, and the food is covered. And I could dance all night, and I can go for art auctions, and I can catch a show a day. And I'm on a different port every day, and I can walk on different beaches. Why not do that? And the doctor will come to my room.
Yeah, it's not as ridiculous as it sounds. I mean, there are some people that choose that option. And unless you become really dependent on daily medical treatment, that is one way to retire.
Yeah. Because then they can cremate me and put me in the beach, on the ocean, the fishies, and I'm happy. So, I mean, these are all the thoughts that's going through my head, right? And I have met in cruises older folks, actually women, as a group of women take cruises every year, because that's how they keep their life and their sisterhood vibrant. So I bring this up to say that planning for retirement shouldn't be scary. It could be fun. It could be fun. It could be with people you care about, and make the most of it, and reach out to people like David and Jennifer and their community of service providers, because as you said, David, it's free.
It is. And you make a very good point. It should be fun. No different than planning for college when you're in your teens, or planning for a career when you're in your 20s, or planning for your family. This can be fun. This can be an enjoyable time of life. And again, you increase your chance of having it be enjoyable by getting ahead of it, and don't let it catch you off guard. Prepare for it, plan for it, and then go enjoy it.
Thank you, David. I am going to open this up for conversation from our live audience. Go ahead, Robin.
I am driving, so I am keeping my face off. Okay. But wonderful, wonderful conversation. And I have a question on insurance. I know that long care health insurance exists, long care term health insurance exists. What about, but that's like if you're sick or become injured or something, but what about assisted living? If you're not necessarily sick, but you've just gotten old enough that you need to move into an assisted living place, is there insurance or something like that for that situation?
Yeah, actually, long-term care insurance can be used to offset the cost of senior living. Just to be clear, Medicare cannot be used to offset the cost. Again, Medicaid is there, and if you qualify for Medicaid, that can be applied to your housing costs. But long-term care is one way to help manage the rising costs of senior living. Again, that's something you want to get ahead of and plan for early. You don't want to go shopping for long-term care insurance when you need it. It's one of those things you want to do back in your 30s or 40s, and then just check in on it periodically. Make sure it's the right amount, because unfortunately, these options aren't getting cheaper as time goes on. So you want to make sure your policy is keeping up with the costs. An interesting development on the long-term care front is the state of Washington is the only state in the nation now that has a long-term care insurance tax. So if you do not have private long-term care insurance, you will be taxed by the state of Washington and pay into a fund so that when you are at an age where you need to tap into that, it's sitting there. There's some serious problems with this program. It's not portable. So if you retire to Florida, you don't get to tap into that pool. And when it is time to pull it out of that fund, unfortunately, it's going to be a lot less than what you need. But the point is, Washington is the first state to try something, failed as it may be. They're trying something to help with the long-term care insurance situation, because quite honestly, Robin, most people don't have it. Let's just call it what it is. Most people don't think ahead and get long-term care insurance. And it's a great option to help pay for what most people will need later in life.
Okay, that's great. And there's one kind of follow-up on that. So sometimes you get it, what you think is long-term care insurance, or, different kinds of insurance, but when times arrives that, oh, it doesn't cover this, doesn't cover this, doesn't cover that. Are there any little sneaky loopholes that we need to be aware of to look for when we're getting something lined up?
That's an excellent question. And I kind of chuckle because I would not claim to be an expert on this subject at all, but there are people who do know this subject inside and out. I'm sure someone with a financial background or a estate planner, possibly even an elder law attorney, would be a good person to go over the policy. I would not recommend to just go out and buy one off the shelf. I would get professional help to make sure you're picking the right policy, where you don't have to deal with words like sneaky and trickery. You want something that's going to be very clear and understood, so that when you come to that point in your life where you need it, there are no surprises.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Good question, Robin.
Very deeply insightful questions as always, Robin, and thank you. Thank you for taking the time to answer those, David. Robin, I would add to that, coming to a episode very soon here is our ability to address this specifically. I am working on this personally myself. And one of the things I did for our family is life insurance has evolved so much. Life insurance comes with long-term care and internationally portable home health care. I personally have that. I made sure I invested in it. One of the biggest mistakes people make is expect their employers to cover life insurance, and everybody forgets when the employer downsizes you, you no longer have that life insurance. So I always recommend my clients and my students to get life insurance on their own, especially when they're starting life, because it's cheaper when you're young. And put that portability and put that long-term care rider and living benefits options. There are a lot of people who get life insurance for children as soon as the children are born, because if nothing else, it could pay for college, it could pay for their down payment of the home. Lots of development in that arena. And I am working on making sure these tools and options are available to our community. So I will be bringing that on very soon here, Robin. So keep your ears tuned. Any other questions, any other thoughts? Janice, Jennifer?
David, perhaps you could touch on the veterans aid and attendance. In my experience, our seniors have no idea that there's monies available through aid and attendance.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. If you are a veteran, investigate your options. It's incredible how many things are out there for veterans, and it's almost as incredible about how difficult it is to find them unless you really go digging. There are companies that will assist with that search or to help you get on the benefits program, but there are also a lot of free resources out there. So before you decide to go with a service that's going to charge you something, I strongly recommend contacting the Veterans Association in your city and find out what they can suggest to get the journey started. But Jennifer makes a very good point. Veterans oftentimes leave a lot of money on the table, not realizing that they were entitled to so many benefits. Things like very low cost prescriptions, durable medical equipment for almost no cost. There really is so much out there, but you do have to do some digging. So I strongly recommend, if you are a veteran or if your spouse was a veteran, contact the VA and get that conversation started. It can be an awkward uphill journey, but it's definitely worth it if you are a veteran. Thank you for bringing that up, Jennifer.
Thank you for the idea, Jennifer, and thank you for sharing the details, David. So that brings up a question for me. Here are people who have gone and served our nation. Why do we make access to what they need sneaky? I'm borrowing Robin's word. If it's earmarked for them, why don't we make it easily accessible? These are people who are willing to give their lives so that the rest of us can live, right? So
I wish I had a good answer. I asked the same thing. It's unfortunate. I'm not going to make any editorial comments on this topic. I agree with you. It shouldn't be difficult to get those benefits that you're entitled to, but if we're just going to be pragmatic for 2 seconds, call it what it is. It is unfortunately difficult. Get some help, stay on it, start early, because sometimes the application process can take years. But I don't have a good answer as to why is it so arduous to get through that whole process. It shouldn't be. These people have put their lives on the line to protect us. They should be rewarded with these benefits.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Janice, any closing thoughts before we wrap this up?
Well, thank you so much, David. Wonderful, good information. Some of it even I was not quite aware of. As far as someone that you know in a community that has caregiving responsibilities for their parents, and you know that their parents really should be in an assisted living, and you have recommended that this person look into it or to find more help, and yet they're not, is there any kind of legal recourse? Because it's almost bordering on elder abuse or neglect. And I didn't know if you've run across any of these kinds of situations and how you would have handled it.
Yeah, that's a touchy one. I had an experience several months ago where a woman was without everything, fill in the blank. She had no spouse, she had no children, she had no finances, really no circle of friends. And she was in a rehab center because she had had a stroke. While she was there, they discovered she had cancer. I mean, this was just a very, very sad situation. I worked with her. I found a community that was going to work with her on the skilled side, get her on Medicaid so she could move into the assisted living side. We had it all lined up. And in the end, she decided to go back home to her apartment. And it really bothered me. You know, to me, that was a death sentence. She wasn't going to go to her cancer treatments. She wasn't going to get the help she needed. I asked the exact same question, Janice. I said, what can we do? What can we do to stop her from making this honestly reckless decision? And unfortunately, what I found is that unless she is down the road with dementia or some type of mental issue, you really legally cannot force someone to make the right decision. It's still a choice. They can make that very dangerous bad decision. It's a great point, Janice. I wish I had a better answer for you, and I still hope that lady's okay, because it bothered me to no end that she did this to herself.
Yeah,
It's
I can appreciate that, David, because there are a lot of seniors living within our communities who need help, who have been identified, and yet because they are still functioning adults, they can still choose to not help themselves, basically.
Yeah.
So I was just curious as to whether or not there were any kind of legal options when you know someone is suffering like that. So thank you. We haven't quite gotten there yet, but hopefully someday. You
When I hear of something, Janice, I'll pass it on to you,
know. Okay, wonderful.
because I'm
Thank you.
genuinely interested. I really want to know for the next time, just to know what kind of options I have to maybe gently force someone to make a better decision.
And it's a tough way to go. It really is.
It's an interesting dilemma. And to me, what comes to mind is this is really no different from any time in life. People know where they are is not healthy, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, but they choose to stay in that same space because they're afraid of change. And not wanting to change and fear of the unknown, if we don't help people deal with that when they are young, they're going to carry it into old age. And this is a fear that we are going to have to deal with across society. And we shouldn't wait till somebody ages to deal with this, because we have young people who are afraid of change. People stay in abusive marriages. People stay in toxic jobs. People stay in unhealthy physical environments because they don't want change. And so to me, that issue is deeper, and it's as ancient as humanity itself. So how do we deal with giving people the ability to identify the need for change and change so that we can evolve? And can we do that for everybody? I mean, even if you're in a car crash, if you refuse to let the ambulance take you to the hospital, they can't take you to the hospital if you're conscious. So it is what it is. And so how do we help people navigate change? That's a whole different conversation. But thank you. Thank you for this insightful hour, David. I appreciate you taking the time and talking to us about how to plan and why plan for our silver years. And
Yeah, I appreciate you having me here. And again, get ahead of it. The earlier you start, the better your final years will be.
Absolutely. And to our live audience here, appreciate you being a part of this conversation so that we can bring these insights and information to our global community so that everybody has a better shot at planning. Remember, our failure to plan is always going to be our plan to fail. And there are enough professional help around us, enough caring people around us who will step up and be that sounding board, be that community to brainstorm and come up with ideas. No aspect of our life do we need to plan alone. So take advantage of the humanity around you. Take advantage of the goodness that others are putting forth. And take that opportunity, take that walk, and take that with joy, because life is to be lived. Life is to be joyfully lived till that last breath we take. So embrace that joy, embrace that with courage and confidence, and take the journey with other people right by your side, because only together we thrive. Remember, every human interaction is our opportunity for transformation. So go out there, interact, engage, transform lives, and in the process, be sure to invest in your own transformation.